Hi, everybody. Thank you
Yeah.
for joining us this evening at the Frontline Club. It's our first event on Afghanistan for 2022, and it's the first of a series. And we're hoping that from February, from next month, we'll be back in person as well as online. So back to hybrid and human contact. Let's see how that goes. But for this evening, we're online, and I'm very grateful to everybody who has joined us and the wonderful panel that we've put together here. It's 5 months since the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan, and in that short time, the problems that were clear before under the Republic government, poverty, hunger, lack of an economy, insecurity, ethnic tensions, have only worsened. The Taliban's interim government has put a lot of effort into the suppression of women, as we've been seeing, but not a lot into alleviating suffering, distributing relief, opening up economic activity, or cooperating with the international community. And so we've also had the suppression of domestic media, in some cases even the control of the movements of foreign journalists who've gone to Afghanistan for reporting purposes. And that's also meant that the picture that we're getting outside Afghanistan of what's going on the inside is far from complete. So this evening we're going to attempt to put that right. I did make numerous requests to the Taliban's interim authority to be represented here amongst us this evening, but they declined or were unable to find anybody who was appropriate and available at the same time. So the guests that we have here this evening, we'll be talking about different issues that I hope will go some way towards helping us piece together a jigsaw of what's happening in Afghanistan right now. And in the case of humanitarian relief needs, how we might be able to help, because that's an awfully complicated and complex mosaic as well. So my first guest is Shukriya Barakzai. I'm thrilled to have you with us. Twice elected to Afghanistan's parliament, Shukriya is a former journalist and magazine editor, for which she won awards, international awards, and she's been an advocate of human rights and women's rights for most of her life. She joins us this evening from her home in London. She was evacuated to the UK by the British military. Shukriya, welcome. Let's start with what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan now. The stories of brave women continuing to protest in the streets, to call for the Taliban to honour their rights and keep their word on a whole variety of things, from education to work to public representation. At the weekend, we heard that women who were demonstrating were attacked with pepper spray, amongst other things. So it looks like there's a very real, concerted and largely successful, perhaps, effort to keep them from speaking up and speaking out. What's the situation?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I do believe the situation of Afghanistan brings all of us under one umbrella to think what will be the next. Because despite of the current situation, when the peace deal was being made between United States of America and the Taliban, the women of Afghanistan was raising their voices, and we have been asking that no one should sideline the women of Afghanistan. And the women's issue is one of the most important topic and issues where Taliban never trust, never believe, and never they show any sorts of commitment on change on their opinion when it comes to their behavior with the women in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, since October till now, from the August till now, as we all are witness, all the schools doors are been shut for women and for little girls. They cannot go to school after primary school. It means secondary school and high school. It's just been banned just because they are girls, just because of their gender, which is a clear sign of gender discrimination. And the second, for the university student, just women and girls are going to be punished because they're women. They are not eligible. They are not allowed to go to university and continue their education, higher education. When it comes to the arena of work, as before, the government of Afghanistan was had at least 30% of their employees was been women. It means that 30% of the Afghan government body was been run by women. And that was also part of the Afghan international commitment to the United Nations and other donors. So that 30%, today, just because of the order of Taliban, they are not allowed to go for work and their job. So that means the large number of poverty, because women lost their job since August. So it means poverty, mental destructions, psychological pressure, political pressure, economical pressure, political pressure. So we women in Afghanistan are living under thousands kinds of those pressures, which is you cannot even allowed to go out from home just for a basic need of your day. Because right now, even the taxi driver has the right to decide, according to the Taliban order, they can give us a ride or not. When it comes to our outfit as a woman being, it also needs to be according to the order the Taliban just recently published. It means we should cover full our face and we should wear again the burqa. Besides of all those, how I could say chaos at the moment in Afghanistan, the only resistant power which has built a kind of consensus among Afghan society, you can see every single day in the last 5 months, the brave girls and women are coming out to the streets with all kinds of messages. They're asking and seeking for their rights, right for education, and they want liberty and freedom. And that is how things are going at the moment between Taliban and women. That's clear. Taliban never likes women. They always giving misinterpretation of Sharia laws. Sometimes they are bringing the issue of culture, but unfortunately, allow me to say that what is the Taliban order? It doesn't have any relationship between the Sharia or Afghan culture, because what they're ordering at the moment, it's all against the Sharia, it's all against the basic principle of Islam, and it's also against all the, how I could say, culture in our society. We've been having women in Afghanistan was been engaged in politics and the history. So right now, Taliban came with a different opinion, and they believe they should eliminate women and they should dismiss women and they should remove women from every single layer. Of course, they took the action from the government when it comes to the society by every day banding the situation for women. That is how it is. But despite of women being shot at, women will be imprisoned, been kidnapped, they've been, as you mentioned recently, Taliban used pepper spray, physical violence, verbal violence, but still the streets are every day shining and raising the voice of women in Afghanistan, not only in Kabul, which is, I would say is just women belongs to Kabul or bigger cities. No, it's across the country. But unfortunately, the lack of correct media information, because the freedom of expression is not existing anymore. Even private sector media is under Taliban censor, so they cannot elaborate, they cannot, let's say, broadcast fairly as it was before. So even hardly you can see a music in the Afghan TV channels, which is before we had a musical performance was been made by women, or some other performance. Even the entertainment programs, which is usually it has men and women, they were standing together and making some TV programs. Even those are been banned for the time for women. So it seems to me like, despite of all the achievement we had in the last 20 years, having women in every single layer of our government and our society, women as ministers, as ambassadors, as a member of parliament, as a head of a human rights commission. So all those achievements was been just destroyed overnight.
Can I ask you, you've been involved in women's rights advocacy for many years, and you are an international voice for the rights of women in Afghanistan, for equal participation in life. Are you seeing any support from international women's organizations? I must say that in the last 5 months, I haven't really heard very much outspoken support for Afghan women from outside the circles of Afghan women. What are you seeing?
Well, to be honest, there are some informal advocacy or forums was been taking shape in places, but it's not that as strong as we was been aimed, because the women's issue and of course the solidarity among women globally is one of the great and strong issues that we need to consider, the women of Afghanistan. But I was really expecting not only women's organizations, international and global women's organization to stand beside the Afghan women and just raising our voice. This is the 21st century, no matter how far we are from each other, but when it comes to the gender, we are women. So that is a great solidarity among us, and that's the reason we should be each other's voices. There was some little bit, let's say, like a roller coaster, up and down support. Sometimes they think it's beyond what they could do more. Everybody was just focusing for the time on two things. Number one was the evacuation process, which is still women and journalists, women judges, let's say women's rights activists, members of parliament, politicians, members of civil society organizations, their life in danger in Afghanistan, no doubt. And the second was the humanitarian aid, which has made the international organization to be pretty busy. Nobody take action for few major concrete steps. Number one, and this is why I am planning to do that. And with a group of small little women, we start a little bit of advocacy and a little bit of lobbying for that. And we are collecting some sorts of documents to just do the documentation first. We would like to appeal for the International Criminal Court, and we want to submit a case against the Taliban and all other those groups, which is they are eliminating violence. They are the reason of systematic violence and how I could say sectarian violence in Afghanistan, and particularly when it comes to the women, because if those kind of crimes will never get a kind of punishment or a recognition, I think the culture of impunity may go on as it was in the last 4 decades. So I think this is the right time for me to call all the audience, and if they like to work and support women in Afghanistan, please be our voices, because as we know, by time everyone is busy with lots of other internal and external issues, the women of Afghanistan may go to be a forgotten piece, an issue, or maybe a kind of story which is nobody likes to ruin their day. As Biden said, let's talk about good things. So for him, even in July, good things was important rather than Afghanistan, which is the US soldiers and others sacrifice their life. I don't know how those politicians, which is they decide the situation for Afghan people, and particularly for the women in Afghanistan, how they have not kind of guilty, how they are not feeling guilt inside, deep down, how they can sleep while they are seeing always the news that how the innocent children and women are paying the price of their wrong politics. So this is the time that I should call, although some steps was been made, for instance, hiring Rina Amery as a special representative in the Department of State for Women's and Human Rights Affairs. But that was late, but still it's a kind of positive steps. But we need more solidarity, we need strong platform, we need to work together, and we need to stand beside each other, because women's issue and women's rights issue in Afghan women's life is matter for all of us.
Indeed. Indeed, I think you're right. And I can understand that Afghan women themselves are still coming to terms with and traumatized by the experience of the last 5 months, but the lack of voices outside, I think, is something that needs to be addressed. And Shukriya, thank you for your presentation. It's a perfect segue into our next guest, Mina Sharif, who I can say has been a friend of mine for quite some time, and you're most welcome. Since August the 15th, Mina has been working with grassroots organisations on the ground in Afghanistan to ensure relief gets through to those who need it. She was born in Kabul, raised in Canada, and has spent her adult life working in Afghanistan in radio and TV and with women and children. We had a long discussion yesterday, Mina. Your focus has long been to support and enable Afghanistan's people to develop their own spaces, support themselves, become self-sustaining. That didn't happen throughout the 20 years of the Republic, as we know. A lot of money was pumped in, a lot of it was wasted, a lot of it was stolen. And now we seem to be seeing the start of the same sort of cycle starting again. The UN is talking about $9 billion set aside for Afghanistan relief. It's like no lessons learned. Tell us, what have you been doing, and what are your thoughts on the situation as it prevails, talking specifically about areas that interest you? You'll have to unmute, dear.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for my unmuted. I appreciate being here and getting a chance to talk about these grassroots projects. But the first thing I want to say about them is that they're not new. And why are they not new is because for the last 20 years and before that, Afghans have had to step up and take these initiatives and handle that kind of all these massive gaps in actually getting aid and support to people who need them after a massive Taliban attack in, for example, the big one in Afghanistan. Where were those families getting relief from? They were getting relief from other Afghans who stepped up for them, whether it was their neighbors or whether it was people who were getting funds together. So this isn't new. This is a practice that has been filling in gaps in as tiny a drop it is in the ocean. Afghans have been showing up for each other because they've had to, because of that mismanagement that's been going on for the past 20 years and for much of history before that. I feel like something that we never talk about is, well, how are we even as we'll call ourselves like the observers, the outside of Afghanistan right now, whether we're Afghan or not. How are we even approaching Afghanistan? Because I think that one of the problems is that disconnect. Are we approaching Afghanistan with nothing but pity and a decision that Afghans cannot fend for themselves and will not fend for themselves? So when we do have aid money, it needs to be managed and operated from an outside system, and those people need to be paid a ton of money for their salaries and be given this R&R and whatever it is that those costs, the overhead goes into. Or are we choosing to believe that Afghans can fend for themselves if given the opportunity, can manage, if it's aid, can manage to take that support and to distribute it and to manage it and to be accountable for it? I think that just in general, the difference between support and interference is what the international community needs to consider. But even as a civilian, when you're looking at Afghanistan, whether you're Afghan, whether you're not Afghan, whether you just want to look at where to send some money and be of some support, take a step back and look at what your approach to Afghanistan is. Is it pity or is it belief and hope that we actually want Afghanistan to be sustainable? Because if you're not having that conversation with yourself, then the steps you take after that could be a complete repeat of the exact cycle we've already had. And I think on many topics, the topic of women, for example, and the topic of aid in this very short period, never mind, like I said, it's been going on a long time, but in this short period, Afghanistan has already shown you that we can do this ourselves with little to no support. These women have faced not only persecution, but the threat of death, and stood up for what they believe and been coherent about it and been explicit about it. And so it's not a matter of, do we need to go back and teach Afghan women what women's rights are? Because that's the conversation that was happening 20 years ago. Well, clearly you don't, because they're standing up and telling you exactly what it is that our culture demands, and the rights that our culture demands, and the rights that Afghan women demand. When it comes to aid, it's a little different. I mean, we all collectively as a world made quite a mess. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, let's step back and let Afghans handle it. Well, no, we all created it together, but can we put the ownership into Afghan hands? Absolutely. This is an opportunity to begin that. If you look at groups like ASEAL, they have their programs developed by Afghans. The distributions are handled by Afghans. Volunteer Afghans are making the distributions. They're creating the reports back to the donors. And that right there is a system that 5 years ago, 10 years ago would have been a $5 million system, and we're now doing it with no overhead. You asked me about the things I'm working on. We're on round 3 of a very small program that gives women who have lost their jobs and were breadwinners just emergency training so that they can work from home. It's not anything big, it's not anything complicated, and it's all donor money, just setting up a funding system, putting the women in training, giving them the supplies and the ability to do the work, and then off they go. And we're talking about giving them everything, which didn't happen in the past 20 years either. In the past 20 years, I saw a lot of, here's a computer program. You're not getting a computer or anything, but I hope you enjoyed class. We're just sort of making sure that from the extension cords to the fabric to the thread, they are actually equipped. There is no overhead, and this entire thing was managed over a few WhatsApp conversations between myself, some women in Afghanistan, and here we are. It's not sustainable for long term because it's not a program that it does obviously need to be more streamlined to expand itself or whatever it is we want to do in the future. But the point is still there. The point is that we are able to stand up and take care of ourselves when given the support that we need in this messy situation that we're in. But as a collective, I don't think people have even bothered to think, how do I look at Afghanistan? Do I look at it as helpless, or do I look at it as a country that, if given the chance, at some point ever, will be able to handle really, really big conversations and really big issues? But even the smaller scale programs have those expanded rather than bringing in from the international community and starting from scratch and creating systems that have not worked to date when it comes to the conversation of women. And we weren't even invited to discuss it in the peace talk. So then now we're confused at why Afghans or what are we deciding actually is really my question. Do we think that Afghans can handle this on their own, or they can't? Because I think we really flip-flop. You're on your own, Afghanistan, to handle this part of the mess, but also we don't think you're capable of actually distributing aid if we give it to you. So we're going to step in and do it. So there needs to just be a decision made. Are we going to trust Afghanistan or are we not? Because to date, history going as far back as you'd like to, we've had interference, not support, but interference from one country to another, to another, to another. And at any given time that it's convenient, the world steps back and says, oh, well, fix it yourself. I get a lot of comments about, for example, the diaspora and why aren't they, creating magical solutions? You're talking to people who haven't had a chance to even see their country. You're talking to people who are traumatized from multiple generations of trauma. So you can't ignore one part of what you're bringing onto the Afghan story, and then at the same time decide that they're on their own. We need to find that balance somewhere in the middle, where we acknowledge that the world has created a big, massive mess in Afghanistan. We're all responsible for contributing to the support in Afghanistan, but with the idea that ownership needs to start going into Afghan hands.
But it's very much, isn't it, the rote solution, billions and billions of dollars of United Nations channeled funding that made a lot of people outside Afghanistan and a very small number of people inside Afghanistan inordinately wealthy, while there's still barefoot poverty in the rural areas and on the edges of cities. I mean, you see it in Kabul. So how now that we see it starting again, Meena, do you think that those mistakes are avoidable, or are we just in historical circularity and okay, that chapter's over, now we start again? Is that where we are? Is that where you see us?
Well, that is where we are, because I think aid is coming from a place of wanting pats on the back and wanting to congratulate yourself as a country or as a leadership, as opposed to actually wanting to create a difference in that country. If you're in Afghanistan asking for gratitude for the dollars that you're giving to your staff as eventually 20 cents of that trickles down to an Afghan, then of course it's a repeat cycle. But if you're actually coming with the approach that you want Afghan society to rebuild itself and to be sustainable and to support the emergency situation that's happening right now, sustainability and aid, I think, are sometimes two different things, because we're in a state of emergency. A lot of that is going to be something like food packages and distribution. But if you take a close look, you can see that Afghans are showing up for each other. I gave that one example, two examples, three examples. This was happening before the fall, well before the fall, last year, the year before. Afghans have created emergency response amongst each other for the longest time, but those are not the people approached to carry to. We don't expand on that. We just bring in the same system again, and then the rest of the world is upset at where are all these dollars, and why aren't we being thanked enough for what we've done? And that's a cycle that will continue if the approach remains we're looking for gratitude versus we're looking for results, and we're looking for Afghans to be able to sustain their own economy and their own country.
Indeed. Thanks for that rundown, Meena. Most grateful to you. I'm going to turn now to Masood Hosseini, who has been a friend and colleague of mine for a really long time. We spent the last 3 months of the war on front lines across the country reporting together. Masood is a winner of the 2012 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news photography. He joins us from the Netherlands to explain what's happened to media in Afghanistan since the Taliban took over. I've written a lot about this issue. I did an MA dissertation on the development of the media in Afghanistan. $1 billion was spent in the space of just 5 years after 2001. I think it was 2010 to 2015. The US just poured money into media development. But then the impression that we were all given was that this was a gift to Afghanistan. Like you were saying, Meena, it's been done before. Afghanistan 100 years ago had a free media, but that's still not to take away from the last 20 years of a pretty feisty and brave media space for sure. And Masood, I know you've been watching it very closely since we left, and I'd really like to hear you share your views on Afghans media in the last 5 months under the Taliban. What does it mean for media freedom?
Yeah, hello to all. And actually, I should say that the whatever we had for the freedom of speech, what achievement that we had, they're all gone. Taliban completely shut down the media, torture a lot of journalists to not talking or to not criticizing the Taliban. And the famous event and the famous news that it came up was the Etalat Rose journalists who've been lashed and being tortured for a long time and one of them actually lost one of his eyes. Well, these are like happened all in these 5 months. Well, I normally during the day I communicate with my friends, the ones who go to cover the whatever happening in Kabul in the streets. So I've done it myself when it was attack happens or a bomb blast happened or any clash in the city happens. We were running to the site, and then we just go closer as much as we could. And police, the Republic police, let's say, they never stop us. We could go in, and after that, all the searching the area by the professionals of criminal department, then we could go even in that, close to everything and find out that what was it, how explosion was, how powerful what it was, how many people died, and all this. But now it's completely banned. Taliban never let any journalist to go close. We have a lot of videos right now sharing in social media that Taliban are beating journalists, breaking their cameras, and arrest them. And as one of them I hope that is out of Afghanistan right now. I can't name him now, but he was in the Taliban jail, and he got out, and 2 days ago, he called me and talked to me about what happened inside the Taliban prison. He told me that Taliban, well, every group is kind of managing and being like ordered by one mullah from the south of Afghanistan. And he said that when the mullah understood that he's from Panjshir, for example, so ordered that he need to be tortured by electricity. So he was tortured by electricity, and then he was lashed 44 times in the waist area. And when after that we start a lot of campaign, a lot of trying to raise our voice, and many organization, international organization for media sent and gave a statement. Amnesty International, American Journalist Union, Journalists Without Borders, and all this. Then they kind of felt pressure and tried to use this again, this situation. They free him, and but they brought a kind of a paper, just I will talk about that after this, and said that you have to sign this. And he said that on the paper that I have to sign, I had to sign, and my father had to sign, and 2 more brothers had to sign, was written that you, after this, you cannot make or share or broadcast any news against Islamic Emirat of Taliban. If you do, we are, allowed to take you back to the prison. Then the second part was that you sign, and you will agree that you cannot go out of Afghanistan. But if you do go out of Afghanistan, your father or 2 brothers who sign, they will be responsible. It means that they will be captured. So today there was I saw another kind of order, let's say, because whatever Taliban say in the media, I don't know what should I call it. They're not government, they're not being recognized, they don't have any constitution law, and I really don't know what to call it. But one of the spokesperson, Balkhi, today announced that they will bring a serious change in information law, in the free circle of information law. Well, here I don't know how to talk about this when Taliban when they captured Kabul, when they invade Kabul, actually, they said that they do not accept any constitution law. This was the first when they announced it in the palace, when the Taliban mullah sat on the Ghani's chair. That was the in the news. Then after that, they said that they will implement the 1964 constitution law from Zahir Shah. But in today, they said that they're gonna bring a big change in this free circle of information law, which is for 2004. So I really don't know what they really want to do, but the main thing is that they just want to play with the public. They just want to play with the international community, try to buy what we call it, try to buy time, and just put pressure and fool international community that we are doing and we are acting as a government or as a system. So today I find out, and there was another news, unfortunately, really worrying, that Zamane Radio, which is a Persian radio in Prague, well, I have a really good friends that working there as a news editor, and then today they found a document that shows that Taliban leaders trying to justify like religious justification to kill and to punish the former military and former ANA personnel. So I saw this document myself. It was signed by several mullahs, and they try to, I don't know, maybe to their own Kuwaita Shura, or the highest Shura that they have the religious Shura that they have, and then they will give the permission. And if this permission being given to Taliban, every soldier of Taliban is allowed to kill an A personnel or NDS personnel, and well, everything will be again in chaos. And well, today also there was a news about the Panjshir University, which was burned down completely by Taliban. But today there was a woman photographer, let's say a woman activist, took picture for the first time, and the picture of this university, burned university, was in social media, which made a huge reaction from everywhere, from all over the world. The people from Afghanistan were sending messages. They were just showing their solidarity, and bring a lot of historical events of that, like 25 years ago, Taliban used this policy for destroying the agriculture products in north of Afghanistan. And then now they are starting to eliminate those organizations which is in the rule kind of other part of Afghanistan, in the rural area, and is related to another tribe that they have, they are using them to develop their own education and so on. So and yeah, well, as Ms. Shokriya said, there was a statement by the UN Human Rights Organization and Women Organization and Amnesty International about the violating, institutionalizing the violence against women, which will be a new rules and new regulations saying that against, violating the women's right, probably a lot of regulation about how girls can use education system, they use higher education, university, private university, and all this, which will come up soon. And I'm waiting to see tomorrow and after tomorrow that what will happen on that thing too.
Thanks, Masood. Mr. Balkhi, who you mentioned before, was one of a number of Taliban officials I invited to join us. It's a pity nobody wanted to take part and explain themselves, but thank you. It sounds to me like the lights are going off, and the dimmer it gets, the worse it gets for people inside Afghanistan. Our next guest this evening is Neelam Raina. Hi, Neelam. She's an academic and an activist who's been working to bring vulnerable people out of Afghanistan for the past 5 months. She's had some success, but that space is shrinking. No flights, no visas, no passports, no welcome. I've invited Neelam to join us to talk about the situation for people who have left Afghanistan and find themselves now spread out all over the place, from Albania to Mexico and lots of places in between, subject to arbitrary policies, it seems, that are fueling uncertainty and compounding trauma. Neelam, thank you for being with us. What's your analysis of the situation now? Please give us a little bit more of the history of what you have been doing, if you wish, bring it up to where we are today, and tell us why we should be talking about this.
I will pick up from where, thanks for inviting me. I've been listening very closely. I think I will pick up from where Meena left off. All the aid that was delivered to Afghanistan, I'm in London, so it was 3.2 billion pounds of aid that the UK government gave unilaterally. Let's not talk about the multilateral funds. The aid that went into Afghanistan put some people in danger. I'm oversimplifying this, of course. Those who were at risk because they pursued the democratic goals of Western governments found themselves high and dry and left on the ground. We were part of this because some of these people are part of a research project that I lead. We were trying to get these individuals out because they were at risk because of the aid that they received. Now the aid went in two directions. Based on what Meena is saying, the aid went in the direction of building all these ideas and notions, and the minute the axe falls, you say, we did, but we can't trust you. Of course, you can't do this. We are very sorry. Goodbye. And then the following question that Meena came to about, do you trust me with the aid without you sitting on my head and telling me what to do? That's one thing. The principles of aid that drove women, peace and security as an agenda, which was driven by the UK, US, and quite a few European countries, where women were empowered to think about their rights. That was all. If you don't trust them to come to a peace talk, what was the point of that money? Okay, so that's by the by. So I got involved in Afghanistan in August in getting people out who had been left high and dry by the UK government. Despite receiving UK aid, these people were not offered any support. So we managed to get some people out thanks to lovely Poland. They decided to get on a military evacuation. And then we raised funding to get the rest of them to Mexico and to other places where they were safe. Well, the priority in August was to find safety. And I begged and pleaded, I think pretty much every country, 27 nations I have contacted personally via email, via Twitter, via DM to say, can you give us security? We don't need your money. We just need these people to be safe for some time till we can figure out what we can do to help them. The UK closed its door effectively, locked the doors, followed the keys, sent the boats back, and sat there sitting, hoping to launch a world-breaking program, a Gold Star program. And all I saw for 3 months from the 15th of August was a lot of virtue signaling. We are going to do this. We will promise this. We are very committed. We are there for women's rights and education, blah, blah. But it was just a lot of words. There was nothing behind it. We have struggled to get visas. We have struggled to find funding. We have a lot of sympathetic friends who feel really sorry for what's happened to Afghanistan, and that's where it stops. That has shifted in the last 2 or 3 months into a space where that sympathy has turned into a, please stop talking about Afghanistan. How much longer will you talk about it? And we can't fix it. We built it to be here. This was not an accident. August 15th was not an accident, and I shouldn't be preaching to the converted, but this was not an accident. And when you say we are not interested, you are linking up to the selfishness that has become essential to every Western government that exists on this planet. Extreme selfishness, my people first, your problem is yours, we can't trust you, you have Taliban, good luck, goodbye. And that has just repeated itself. The minute you dig a little deeper for all these promises these nations make, we reach a point where we draw blanks. Every single time we draw blanks. So what is happening with the people who have managed to move? is they are carrying mountains of trauma that all the advertisements for special advisors and policymakers in MPSSS, so mental well-being and social mental health and social well-being kind of stuff, there aren't enough people who are trained enough to be able to plug into the kind of need for mental health and well-being support that the Afghans who have left the country will need. There is absolutely no such support. Giant humanitarian organizations, and let's take no names here, but giant humanitarian organizations who are mandated to help those who are fleeing persecution and crisis have said that their hands are tied behind their back. If this is your core mandate, you should be doing it. You should not be singing with the governments that are hosting you. There has been very obvious discrimination against every Afghan that we have managed to help as they have exited the country. We have seen young women who we managed to help to get away from Kabul being harassed, pretty much racist behavior across the board, from airport staff to airline staff to civil aviation authorities. Just about everybody who could put them in a box and insult them did so. So we are seeing various levels of racism very evident. And this is not just in the Western world, this is in South Asia too. Afghanistan has become a problem in South Asia that other neighbors have to solve again. So they are feeling very patronizing about this. And it's very obvious that they are. Bearing in mind they had a very big role to play in the mess, let's not go there. So we have found that the people that we know the trauma, but we've also found that a lot of people based on social capital driven movements of people, those who are educated, those who are qualified and have some significant personal wealth, manage to get away faster than everybody else. And it's become very, very clear in the last 3-4 months that those who are left behind, the women that I work with in Afghanistan, don't matter. They are not important people. They don't have powerful voices. So to the Western world, we are really sorry, but we got who we can out. The ones who you got out are those who spoke English and had a passport, and not everybody has one. So what happens to those who are at risk but don't have that social capital? And I think that social capital is becoming, and if I look at this without the criticism or a critique lens, those who are educationally or professionally qualified or have worked in some capacity in Afghanistan, in whichever office or whichever space, have moved out of Afghanistan and have found themselves safe but locked in tiny, tiny hotel rooms with some kids or many kids with them, and absolutely no scope of thinking about a professional future or self-reliance or, I don't know, the ability to get a job. Can you get a job? No. And so that opens the aid page the other way around. When you make somebody who's able to work and was working run away from their nation and bring them to yours, and then you stuff them in the asylum box because you want to do them good, then you're tying their hands once again. I think this entire system is broken. Development aid that is done to pat myself on the back, as Meena said, but is also done to assert me of some amount of guilt of interference in your nation. That's one problem. When this causes disaster and people move, and then you stuff them in the asylum box for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, where they cannot work, have to depend on social security systems, and then you have a beautiful scapegoat to hang your next election around. All these refugees in England, oh my God, they're taking our jobs. They're not. They could take your job if they were allowed to work, but they are not allowed to work. They are being pushed into taking asylum. And asylum, I think, for all those who are here, and I say this personally as a displaced kid myself, is the last resort. Nobody wants to be in that space unless that space is the only space available. And for all these countries talking about how they feel sorry for Afghanistan, the asylum route seems to be the only route they want to offer to most people in most of these countries. And how is that fair? How is that the truth of what happens to somebody who's displaced? So that's where we are at, where this whole system, I think the clouds and the curtains have come off. The bare truth of how this whole thing operates is now not a secret. You don't need to be an expert. Everybody can see it. The emperor has no new clothes of any kind, neither the American one nor the British one.
Yes, a devastating analysis. Thank you so much, Neelam. I think, Masood, you're going through this personally. You know, Neelam is saying refugee status is a last resort, and I think maybe in a little while, once we've heard from Ilaha, you can talk a little bit more about your own experience in this space, because, as Neelam says, it's a way of pushing the problem to the side of the plate and alleviating the guilt. We screwed up your country, now screw you, which I have said in many ways, many times. But let's move on for now. Ilaha, I'd like to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us. I know you're in the brightest part of your day in America at the moment. We can see your sunlit room. I'm very grateful to you, and I just want to introduce you. I know that since August, you've founded Uplift Afghanistan, and you've been working tirelessly for the past 5 months, first to facilitate evacuations, which must have been an incredibly steep learning curve and very hard work, as we've heard from Neelam. And now that the window for departures appears to have closed, on getting relief supplies, especially food, to people who need it. Can you tell us about something about how you got involved at the transition from evacuation to on the ground relief? And you know, we haven't talked about the sanctions regime. Maybe you can talk too about whether or not the sanctions have impacted the way you've been working and what you've been able to do.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and very glad to be on this panel with the esteemed guests. Just to let you know, I was born in Afghanistan, and 42 years ago, a few months.
I think you've muted yourself accidentally.
Sorry. The Soviet invasion happened, and I was born the night the president.
42 years ago, that's where we lost you.
Oh, okay. So 42 years ago, I was born the night the President Taraki was assassinated in Afghanistan. And 40 days later, my family and I fled in a very similar fashion how Afghan people are fleeing the country today to Germany. From there, we came to the States. So all my life, I've only known of war and conflict in Afghanistan. Since 2003, I've been actively traveling back to Afghanistan to do grassroots aid work. Nothing big, nothing with the big institutions, just connecting with the communities. Lynn, I met you last June or July in Kabul. We went, and so I want to take one step back and say, explain why are we in this situation, just this recipe of disaster. So we had a run on the banks right before the collapse on August 15th. We have a new government, de facto government with no experience governing and a pretty bad track record. We have freezing of assets of the central bank. We had an abrupt cutoff of foreign aid. We have the loss of jobs. The government was the biggest employer of the country. We have brain drain. We had existing issues because of the poverty levels, COVID, drought, and now all of this. So now we're in maybe the world's worst humanitarian disaster. And that's a pretty big statement. I mean, we see these facts and these headlines, but really just taking it in. So what happened was, I was not an advocate of setting up another nonprofit, but with all these series of crises, and especially the financial one and the sanctions, I thought it would be a good idea to set up a structure around creating a fund which will enable us to support grassroots organizations and community-led initiatives. Echoing Meena John's statement, the people on the ground know how to deal with the challenges set forth every day. So we need to lean in on them, and we need to support them, and they need to take the lead. And so that's what we're doing at Uplift. And we have started, well, we have several areas of focus, but because of the humanitarian crisis, the urgency of it, and the evacuations, we've now focused on these two areas. So we are supporting grassroots organization. We're supporting an organization that focuses on accessing women, specifically women widows. So we are distributing winter packages to them that have food, medicine, and coil wood. And then we're working with the CDCs, the Community Development Councils. And this is a program that's been going on for about 18 years through the Citizens Charter National Priority Program. And there are about 20 to 25,000 CDCs throughout Afghanistan, which means they have access to all 34 provinces. So we are trying to address with the ultra poor communities in rural villages first. And that's what we've been doing, and it's going by very, very well. And sending money in, OFAC, that's been a huge issue. And part of the reason why I set up Uplift was, how are we getting money in? There, in the beginning, we were doing Western Union and MoneyGram, but now we're really focusing on the Hawala system, which is actually working quite well, and getting money in cash into the country. Also, I'm working very closely with the US Treasury, because there are sanctions against certain individuals in the Taliban and the Haqqani networks. And as a US agency, if you send money to the wrong person, you're going to jail. So that hindered a lot of humanitarian support in Afghanistan. And so there are 5 general licenses that basically the US Treasury takes a non-enforcement posture towards humanitarian aid. And if you fall under these 5 categories, we still run every name we send money to through the SDN search to make sure that they're not sanctioned against. So that's the humanitarian aid and direct relief. We've been working on evacuations. Naturally, I think by default, if you were working in Afghanistan or had a connection in Afghanistan, you were connected to these evacuations. Some people are still in it and some people have moved away. I was one of those people who just fell in it, getting people through the airport gates at Kabul airport, Barone Gate, and that was a nightmare and very humiliating for Afghan people in history. We moved to Mazar. I worked with a lot of civilian groups. And then we kind of put some structure under Uplift. I have to say the evacuation space has drastically changed from day one till now. And as you said, countries are not accepting Afghan people. They're not interested in Afghan refugees. It's unfortunate. And it's very heartbreaking, because there are truly people who are at risk, are journalists, our human rights defenders, our women, and our Hazara community members that we're trying to focus on. And at this point, it's just getting countries to accept Afghans. We're very much for dignified resettlement, so we don't just evacuate people and throw them somewhere. We have to have a pathway forward, and also that pathway forward has to have a resettlement plan. And so that, among many other things, are keeping us busy at Uplift. Yeah.
Well, when we were talking yesterday, Ilaha, you mentioned and Neelam has mentioned it as well, the mental health impact of the trauma and the displacement and the just, the underlying violence of what has been happening inside and outside to communities left behind and communities that have been created in abroad. How are you seeing that the trauma manifest itself, the mental health issues that are coming through?
Yeah, that is coming up for me a lot, perhaps maybe on a daily basis, especially from women in the country who, number one, were hoping to get evacuated. And number two, are dealing with the reality, Lynn, that they no longer have a career, that they no longer have a voice, that they no longer play a role in society. And that is, that is very heavy. And I'm very worried. I mean, now my calls and my request to my network is, I need psychologists. I need Dari and Pashto speaking psychologists. Please help me. And it's a real problem. And I mean, this is for men and women, but women in particular, women who had the democracy dangled in front of them for the last 20 years, who were hopeful of a future that an inclusive future for Afghanistan, have lost that now.
You're reminding me of all the stuff that we heard before August the 15th about this is Taliban 2.0, and they're reasonable. The head of the British Army, General Sir Nick Carter, now retired, said publicly many times. But anybody who was really paying attention, Masood and I went to the Central Highlands, and we talked to people in a township that had been overrun by the Taliban for a few days before the citizen militias pushed them out. And in that short time, all the rumours that we'd heard about what had been happening in the north of the country to communities that were taken over by the Taliban were confirmed for us by people who said Taliban came in, took over the mosques, and the mosques were used as loudspeakers calling for the names of all women of childbearing age, married, unmarried, widowed, because the plan was to marry them off to Taliban fighters as part of the booty of victory. But what this is essentially confirming is a sex slavery practice. So anyone who didn't know that what we've been seeing unfurl under a so-called government, i.e. as official policy for the last 5 months was going to happen, just wasn't paying attention. And I think, Neelam, you and I have talked as well, haven't we, about the mental trauma suffered not only by women, but women, as we know, bear the brunt of it. But have you seen any efforts to amongst the evacuated now refugee communities to address the mental trauma?
Some of them have decided, now that it's been quite a few months, they have decided to kind of sit together and share, but it's so fresh that they can only go so far in the conversation before they retreat back into silence. And I think that is a difficult space to be in. I think more than the trauma, the only thing that I see positive or something that breaks past that trauma is their extreme desire for education for their kids. They don't care about anything else as long as the kids can get to school. And they're very aware of the fact that the kids haven't gone to school for nearly a year now. But the trauma is evident in hair loss, lack of sleep patterns. I'm getting messages at 3 a.m. their time. The desire to want to know what's happening, but don't want to know what's happening. So the pattern is starting to emerge, which is very hard to watch and very hard to fix.
Yes, and this is why nobody wants to face it on an official level. And once you're up there in the ether, you don't have to. We have had one question. Anybody who's tuning in, please send in any questions if you have them. Nishat Ahmad asked a question. Do you think there are any moderate groups within the wider Taliban leadership which the US, UK and the EU should support to bring about change? I know, Masood, you answered in writing, but I wonder, Shukriya, if you have an answer to that. Do you see any groups within the Taliban leadership who could become reasonable 2.0 people that we can, in the West, deal with? And I guess we're also talking about here the Taliban's clear and desperate need for diplomatic recognition and also cooperation with the international community if they're going to get their hands on aid money. What's your feeling about the situation there, Shukriya?
From my understanding, Taliban are not one united group as they was before. And it's a big misunderstanding if we think they changed or they have even a little bit of mindset, something with the name of modernity. That's not the Taliban, because I think Taliban had a great chance when they signed the Doha Agreement. We saw that was like their international commitment, which is they didn't, they signed, but they didn't prove that they believe on that agreement, because according to that agreement, ceasefire, going for inclusive government, and respecting women's rights and human rights and freedom of expression and stuff like that was been saved. But so finally, Taliban proved that they are not the one that we can rely or believe or trust them, or at least to think. I do understand Taliban is like an elephant in the room. They are in the reality in Afghanistan, but this reality shouldn't be mistaken by women. We women are also a reality in Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan is also a reality in Afghanistan, and those realities shouldn't be victimized just because of the barbaric regime of Taliban. But of course, there is also kind of fear if Taliban get weak and the Daesh, ISK will get more power, how this thing will shape, because at least right now, Taliban can speak with the people and they are somehow in charge. But what about the summer, if the internal, or let's say another civil war, or among the terrorist group wars will start, how people will be suffer at the time? Again, what will be the emergency to think and talk about it? I do believe in certain level and a very low level kind of engagement, and especially when it comes for the humanitarian aid, not true to the Taliban, but of course they can cooperate with the local organization inside of Afghanistan. That will make sense a little bit, not too much. But to be honest, believing and trusting them and put them in a political arena, I think maybe their words are so nice, gloomy, shiny, but their action is really, really, really representing from bottom of their heart what they believe. Dark mind, barbaric, totalitarian, extreme Naziist type of mentality, which is they are carrying, and they are not ready for any kind of reforms. When they are not respecting the Holy Quran, okay, which is that is the order for every single Muslim, how we should believe that they will accept some international rules, some national rules, and some demands from the society and international community. So this is a kind of disease that we need to build the healing system within a country. Anything outside, I do believe it may not help, but of course there should be some kind of constructive pressure on the Taliban that they should change their behavior, and they should be holding accountable about what they are doing and what is their duties and responsibilities.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Nishat. I think in one word, the answer is no, but the detail is always more than welcome. Frank Lewidge, hi Frank, has also sent us a question, and I'm going to read it out. If this is the world's worst humanitarian disaster, isn't now a time realistically to accept that Western countries should release frozen and sanctioned funds to provide essential aid on a large scale to preserve at least basic life support? Perhaps, Minna, you'd like to have the first go at that.
Yeah, thank you. I think in this intense focus on the frozen funds versus the actual disaster, it doesn't match, because the frozen funds belong to the people who hold those accounts, and that's not how you're going to save the country, or save the mess, I should say, the disaster that we're in. We're in a emergency mode because of the dependency that was created by the aid organization. So it's not, I think we should separate that, the frozen funds from the aid that Afghanistan has been dependent on. And yes, it is absolutely, like I said, I would classify this time period, I think anyone would, as an emergency period, in especially with winter approaching. I think everyone's quite aware that famine is high risk across the country. In emergency mode, absolutely, that has to be addressed. And I don't think it's about the Western world graciously unfreezing the funds that belong to individual account holders. Rather, they need to take accountability for the dependency that's been created in Afghanistan with that aid, but with the change of allowing Afghanistan to carry that aid forward and then slowly move towards what I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that the past has shown us that coming in to handle that aid yourself hasn't worked. So asking the Western world to take part in supporting this emergency situation also helps with that the tragedy of the Western world, which is the Afghans having to flee because of the emergency situation, so that it kind of buffers that for them as well. So yeah, we do need the Western world to show up, but again, in the form of continuing the aid work that Afghanistan's become dependent on, not just to unfreeze people's individual funds.
Yeah, thank you. I hope that answers your question, Frank. Chris Blackburn also has a question, and I think, Ilaha, this might be one for you. What role can the international community do to apply pressure to help push the Taliban into creating a more inclusive government? Is that just a pipe dream, considering the Taliban are threatening its neighbours and sinking back into old behaviours? What do you think of that, Ilaha?
You know, in the beginning, during the peace talks, this was supposed to, the Taliban did agree initially to have an inclusive government. I don't know what happened to that. So I've lost hope and trust based on actions that the Taliban have taken. They do want international recognition. They want a few things. So putting pressure on them to get that. And so is there a way? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not hopeful. There are people working on this night and day to see how we can make this happen. How can we bring inclusion? How do we put pressure? And just keep in mind that the Taliban are not one entity. They're very divided. You also have the Haqqanis. So they're not a cohesive structure. There's a lot of infighting between and amongst the Taliban. And that makes it very difficult to engage and interact with them, because what somebody agrees in Balkh province is very different than what happens in Kandahar.
Yes, and there's also the, like you say, the factionalism, and they're fighting amongst themselves for power, but it's dissipated. There is anarchy. There's no police. There's no security. There's no army. It's really quite an anarchistic situation, isn't it? And maybe that means it's too soon to tell, or maybe that means, as Shukriya said, as Masood said, as Mina said, as Neelam said, we know who we're dealing with, and they are not people to be dealt with. Maybe that's it. Marta Piosic, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Marta, has also asked a question, and maybe Masood, you would like to address this one. Is there any reliable resistance from local groups against the Taliban, where we keep talking about women being a huge part of it? That's very true. Maybe we keep talking about them, Marta, because of the out of scale vulnerabilities that Afghan women can be said to face. But as you say, they have brothers, fathers, husbands, and where are they in this entire situation? So I think the crux of that question, Masood, is what resistance are we seeing inside Afghanistan to the Taliban's presence?
Yes, for sure that there are some resistance groups going on, small in some part of Afghanistan. We shouldn't believe, or we shouldn't, think in this way that Taliban took 100% of Afghanistan. There are, villages and some valleys that is not under hand of Taliban. There are a big resistance going on in Andarab, and we had a Maymana and Faryab, which was out of control of the main branch of Taliban because of the ethnicity problem, and the same clash went into the Sarapol. And I hear from my friends and some local journalists that in Sarapol also is getting bigger, the dispute between non-Pashtun Talibans and Pashtun Talibans. And I start, actually, I try to understand the real story behind the Uzbek Taliban and Pashtun Taliban dispute. Well, they said that they arrest the Uzbek Taliban leader because he was involved in a kidnapping, but that's not true. Well, when he got to Maymana, and when they kind of had sometimes after this fall to see that what's going on and what they captured or what they gained, what we call it in Islamic concept, ghanimat. They find out, the Uzbek leader found out that they didn't get anything. They didn't get the Humvees, they didn't get any helicopters, they didn't get any heavy weapon. And then he start ordering his own forces to get those big Humvees and the weapons from the Pashtun Taliban. So this is making a huge dispute right now. And Uzbeks Taliban, well, what we call it now, but I'm sure that all those people who were in the street, they were not Uzbek Taliban. They were just using or coming to this situation. But it will go. We know the history of Afghanistan, and we know the behavior of people in Afghanistan in these situations. So nobody will, kind of get back from their position. And well, they will start a really serious problem. Although the Taliban threaten a lot Uzbek Taliban with their suicide squad, whatever they said. But as we know, and as we know from the last war between Uzbeks and Pashtuns in the north, Uzbeks are also using the same tactics and the same violence that Taliban are using. And well, the country will start the civil war from the north anyway. So as another, part and resistance, we can see that there is something going on in Badakhshan right now between Tajik Taliban, a small group that they had a kind of the control of the mines, mostly the gold mines. So I had a friend who went and visited this, gold mines. And the day that he arrived to that gold mines, he saw that there was a big clash and dispute between Tajik Badakhshani Taliban and Pashtun Taliban. So it's not easy, and we cannot say that, okay, everything is finished and Taliban got all Afghanistan and they're so powerful, nobody can do anything. No, from inside, this is completely historical in Afghanistan, that after every winning against the foreign troops or invaders, what they call it in the history, then they start fighting each other over ghanimat, all those credits, money, weapons, whatever they foreigners leave in Afghanistan. So this will be a kind of a base for the next resistance. At the same time, we should also know that many other regional players might also arm their own players, right, inside Afghanistan. And well, we shouldn't forget that there was a story and news like before Kabul fall that Iran also armed 5,000 to 7,000 Fatimiyun. Well, what they said, they just, armed them against the IS, which I don't know it is existed in Afghanistan. Well, I think that Haqqani is the same IS that we talk about because Haqqani is doing all that. So there is no any other kind of IS. I didn't see any real evidence for it. And then all this will go and will run and will, face, will create a lot of chaos in Afghanistan again. At the same time, as we saw, I just want to go really short to the aids and the frozen monies. So the frozen money, as I listened and followed the news from CNN, which was talking about that all the time, it's not possible to be given to Afghanistan legally. The World Bank, who was the responsible for that, will just release the money from inside Kabul. And now there is no World Bank office at all. Some part of it is in Tajikistan. My friends are working with them. Some part of them are in Pakistan. And when I talk to my friends in Pakistan, the World Bank that is managing Afghanistan, they say that from in these 5 months, they never worked any project or any documentation or any relation or negotiation with Taliban. So there is no other way. The central bank is under the Taliban's administration, which Taliban are not recognized as government. So there is no possibility to, release the funds that are frozen right now. And the other programs and problem that we have with the aids also is the same thing. Nobody knows how they deliver the aids to people, because from everywhere they have to finally they have to agree with Taliban that they do it. And then we saw in the social media many videos and pictures that the aids are given only to Taliban fighters, and people are selling the member of their bodies to get the money. They're selling their children to get the money. It's really going on. And in this cold season of Afghanistan, at the same time, Afghani, which, there was a lot of talks about that, but we forgot it, and there is no more talking about it in social media. But $1 is equal to 105 AFs right now. Yeah. And 1 liter of fuel for the car is more than 90 AFs. When Kabul was not fallen on the hand of Taliban, $1 was only 65 to 70, and 1 liter fuel was only 55 to 60 AFs. So there is a big change. At the same time, there is no money, there is no income, and there is no trade at all. All the borders are closed, and this situation will make a lot of people to join the resistance group for at least some income.
Yeah, I think you're right about a lot of the financial points that you made, although I do know that World Bank donor countries are negotiating with the Taliban at the highest levels. The message being we want to release the funds that were already pledged to the Republic government, but because of the law, we cannot now release. But we will consider releasing them if certain conditions are met, for instance, equal education. And I think the World Bank has been hoping to start releasing money through the first quarter of this year, but whether or not the Taliban will prove themselves to be a reliable partner is another question altogether. I think maybe I'll put my last question to you, Shukriya. Do you see any hope for Afghanistan avoiding a descent into a civil war as Masood is concerned about?
Well, it's hard to say anything about that because the atmosphere, the situation, the frustration of the nation, and of course, the behavior of Taliban and among themselves and with the people, it's giving us a clear red light to be prepared for another civil war. I know it's not a good news. I hope I will be wrong, but this is how it is. We have to talk about the reality on the ground, but maybe something may happen nicely if United Nations take action immediately, since every country, including the neighbor, are complaining about their security, and if Afghanistan will be collapsed, which it is already in the hands of international terrorist groups. So United Nations can take it because that's their duty and they have the authority to take some kind of measure. If there's a possibility of mixed government between international, United Nations in Afghans, to put some interim government in between and to establish a new one based on election, that may change the entire, let's say, political game. But I'm not seeing any kind of appetites from any international organization or countries either to be engaged in war or support or to do something politically to fix the today catastrophe and situation in Afghanistan for the time.
Well, I think we're just about out of time unless anybody wants to jump in with a final word. I think that what you've just said, Shukriya, really ends us on a very sad and, let's not say hopeless, but certainly tragic note. And I hope that your predictions don't come true. Say again?
Can I add something?
Yes, no, you just raise a hand. Sorry, off you go. Yes, please.
It's jumping back to where Marta was coming from, and hopefully this can kind of help us end on a more positive or at least action-based in that kind of a space. I do think a little bit of how I read her question was more in regards to sort of a civilian resistance, more so than maybe that could be as a part of her question as well. And she referenced brothers and husbands and their role. And the problem is, as Masood pointed out earlier, that we don't have access to everything that's going on in Afghanistan because media is blocked, right? So when you're comparing the resistance in Afghanistan to, for example, what we saw in Black Lives Matter, you're not going to have the same impact from a country that's, first of all, not secure enough to go and have these protests. But that being said, young boys were not going to school out of resistance of their sisters not being able to go to school. There were men, grandfathers, brothers on motorcycles with signs having this protest. I think the question isn't where are the Afghans who are, as we know, under threat of their life to do it, but are still speaking for these rights. The question is, where's the rest of the world that put these women on pamphlets and that patted them on the back for being brave enough to do these things, and thank you for going to school, and we built the school and these girls are on it. Here's their name, here's their photo, here they are, and how proud we are of what we've done. Where are they, and where are those protests? So like when we I gave the example of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was a success not only because of the Black community, but because the allies showed up. And it's the big gap here is the allies. It's not Afghans. Afghans, despite the circumstances, are showing up visibly, despite all the limitations that they have. So when we have the question of where are and blank, the question is where is everybody else? Because Afghans are being very clear about how they feel.
Indeed. Well, I would like to thank you Afghans for joining me and Neelam this evening at the Frontline Club for what I hope has been Well, certainly it's been fascinating and interesting and elucidating for me, as these discussions always are, but I certainly hope for everybody else who's joined us. And thank you, and we'll say good night.